We're continuing our interview with Ravs Kaur. In today's episode, we pick up on the discussion about communication. If you missed out on the first episode of this interview, then I encourage you to go back and listen to it first. You can find it, of course, in the same place that you found this episode. My name is Jonathan Cottrell. You're listening to Developer Tea, and my goal on this show is to help driven developers like you find clarity, perspective, and purpose in their careers. Let's get straight into the second part of my interview with Ravs Kaur.
Man, there's so much to talk about here, actually. And I want to dig in for a minute because I just can't help myself. But this is one of my favorite topics to discuss. This whole communication thing that we're doing as teams is so deep and core to our humanity. And we have to think and become really scholars of communication to build good teams. That's 99% of our work, really, is communication. And I think this example, it underscores such a beautiful picture of how complicated it is to be a human. You have this individual who's obviously very good at their job. They've risen in the industry to the senior level position as an engineer, and they're asking this question that, in some regard, is perhaps a question that is out of respect for their teammates, for you as their leader. They're asking a question of, okay, I want to make sure that I'm covering my bases. Maybe I assume that the answer will be yes, but if I assume and I'm wrong, then things could go haywire. I could lose, in some ways, this is an expression by asking this question of how this person actually, got to where they are today, is by, seeking out that clarity and really getting specific with communication. And then your response is exactly, the other complex side of this, which is we have in our minds what we think people believe. And this is such an overwhelming message to us. Our assumptions about what other people believe or what they should believe or what we see, ourselves as and what other people should see us as. This is such an overwhelming message that it seems almost jarring to hear a question like, can I set my hours from 10 to 5? Because you start questioning, like, have I not communicated, our values properly? What is going on here? And what's so wonderful about it is this underscores the fact that even the most experienced people still have communication to take care of. We have to think about it more thoroughly than we're kind of naturally tuned to, especially, I know I'm droning on about this because I care a lot about it, especially in this kind of remote environment that we're in, where communication is even more constrained, and all of the messaging around, our day-to-day work has just gone into this little funnel of Slack or whatever chat tool you use. And so we don't get that day-to-day kind of back and forth like we're used to. And so these illusions that we have about what other people believe about us and the story that's in our head versus reality, the disparity between those things continues to grow more and more and more. And it can be a really difficult problem to solve unless you're very intentional about communication. And I think that's such a good picture of that.
You're absolutely right. I think communication is one of the most difficult challenges, especially, it always has been, right? It always has been, but especially in this time, you're absolutely right. Like, it did make me question. I'm like, wait, did I not, communicate this enough? And even though I say this, like, I was on the other side of it too. Like, my boss is like, he has probably mentioned on, every day, like, if you need anything for your home setup, just go and expense it. Like, he's over communicated that. And even with that, and even with us having the most trusting relationship, I don't know what it was. I think I needed a keyboard or something like that. And I was just like, hey, I know I have one, but it stopped working. And, is it okay if I just get another one? And he had a very similar response. He's like, you know what? He's like, I am of course. And the only reason I'm annoyed or offended is because you felt like you had to ask me, you know?
This is my failing. Yeah.
Yeah. And so, and I was like, well, I didn't really need to ask you. And so it's really funny what you said, because even when I was talking to my developer, I felt the same way. I was like, what, you felt like you needed to ask me? And he had a similar reaction, which was like, no, I mean, I knew it was okay and everything, but I think we're all just trying to learn this together, and we're trying to like clarify our assumptions and just make sure we understood things correctly. Um, and honestly, like on the grand scheme of things, like yeah, it's great. Like it worked out great that we could have that conversation, right? And
Yeah.
we went even further. In fact, what we realized as a company, when everyone sort of went working from home, lines between work and home were already like blurry. But what we found was that more and more people, like now they're on their machines at commute time, and they can feel like they're more productive and more effective because, well, I've got nothing better to do, I can't go outside. And slowly but surely, like you could sense fatigue setting in, right? You could sense
Yeah.
that people aren't taking the time off like they had planned. Like a lot of vacations were disappearing from the vacations calendar, right? And again, from a people perspective, you're like, well, I'm not going to go anywhere, so why take the time off?
Why should I take
Right.
time off? Yeah, exactly.
And then we were like, okay, this doesn't seem sustainable. We encouraged people a lot, to take some time off, and just, almost to a point where we were like, I want to see some vacation added in the next month or two, or a day here or there, by everybody.
Yeah.
And it wasn't being super successful either. I personally tried to set an example, and I took a mental health day off right before our kids' school started in the springtime. And when I did, I realized what I wasn't internalizing earlier, which was that I really needed this time off, right? Like I didn't think I did, but once I took it, I was like, man, I need to do more of this. And so, and some people did, and many people didn't. And then we, as a company leadership team, just said, we're going to be out for a whole week in the first week of August, because we just kind of forced it down, honestly. We realized, some people were doing better than others, but everybody needed that time. They needed time to disconnect. And what was happening was, when people were doing it at different days, they weren't truly disconnecting because stuff was still happening at work. And it was too easy for them to pop back in and help out on something.
Yep.
Because, they didn't really, and it was like a day or two here or there. They're mostly at work. But, when you think of a slightly longer period of time, you start thinking of, okay, what can I do in that time? And nobody else will be working, so I won't be working. And it was an experiment, and I think it was really successful. Like we got really good feedback from folks after that first week of August, where they came back, and some people were like visibly refreshed on Zoom. If you can believe it, right?
Absolutely, I can believe it totally.
You can sense the energy, you can sense the refreshment. And then there were folks who were like, oh, that was good, and that made me realize I need just a little bit more of that. And so I'm going to make it a goal to actually take some time. And then there were folks who were like, yeah, I mean, I got really bored. I didn't do anything. But at the same time, it was still good to not have to think about work. So, in all those cases, what we realized as a company was like, this is really important. We again are going to do some more of this later this year. But it's just, mental health is one of those things that I feel, especially in this time, it's just so important to take care of. I'm convinced that that's going to be the next crisis we're going to have to deal with. It already is. In fact, we are already thinking pretty deeply about it and how we can support our people. So we have a lot of things, and it goes back to what you said earlier. It just has to be intentional. From our Friday games to what we pick, we're doing we're doing a fun challenge, a health challenge for the month of September. Again, because all our interactions with our people at work are about work, except for our Friday
Mm-hmm.
games and lunches. It's like, hey, I need this from you. It's very work related, and you don't have a lot of, you think of deposits and withdrawals, right? Like in energy and relationships, and so, uh, uh, how do you simulate the kinds of things when we were together in the same office? We used to have a lot more of these social or non-work interactions that made you get to know a person slightly better, or you laughed over a cup of coffee. It just doesn't happen that way. And when all your interactions are about work and status of things, and just everything's about getting things done, that can get pretty stressful. It can get
Yeah.
yeah. So we're trying to introduce more. We had a fun chopped challenge too. I would recommend folks listening to this try it out. We sent via Instacart, what was it? Fruit Loops, celery, and soy sauce
Oh,
as
cool.
secret ingredients to everyone's, and they showed up at the same time on everyone's doorsteps. And then over lunch, we all had to cook something out of it and share pictures. And you discover secret talent in your team. So
Oh, I bet. Yeah.
it was really fun.
That is cool. Yeah. I've heard a lot about these kind of culture building things that teams are doing to kind of help people feel a little bit more at ease, more at, not at home. I suppose they already feel quite at home right now. But it is an interesting concept, this idea. And I think you're probably right that as we experience more prevalence of these mental health, I won't even call them issues, just normal mental health problems that humans face and have faced forever, but they're more pronounced because of this particularly stressful period that we're living through. I think you're right. I think we're going to find out that, it's interesting that you mentioned your team initially felt that sense of kind of a surge, a positive momentum of, oh yeah, we're going to, we don't have a commute. We are going to be so much more productive. And in reality, things kind of erode quickly.
Yes.
And, part of that is a clear picture of how just managing by the hours is not an effective strategy, right? Because, technically people are going to have more time, right? Technically, they don't have to have a commute. They can work more at home. So if you're managing by the hours, that's a net positive for you, right? But that's just not how it works. Humans are very different from that. And I think what we've lost, perhaps in the last couple hundred years, this is maybe going beyond the scope of just mental health issues now, but something that we've lost is this idea that work is a constrained activity, that it's not a part of the rest of our lives. And if you think about anybody in the course of history who has accomplished something meaningful, for the most part, these are people who were not under any constraint that was provided to them by an hourly schedule. And some of the greatest work that we've ever seen was done by people who were totally autonomous, that they were inventors, they were, writers, they were whatever the job may be. Typically, it wasn't because, their success wasn't necessarily because they were on time to work and they put in 8 hours a day, right? That's not really the correlation that you find with successful people. And that's not to say that, give your people, total free reign over everything and they're going to turn into a bunch of Da Vinci's, right? That's not the point. But the point is that people do thrive when they have a full range of experiences, right? And full range meaning, you mentioned that some of your coworkers got bored. That's a very important human experience to have. Boredom
agree.
is very important, right? Like we need to have boredom.
Yes.
And how many times do we get a chance to be bored right now?
Yeah. I completely agree with that. In fact, I would take it one step further. Like, I actually believe you lose innovation and you lose creativity if you're always operating to your most, effective, like,
Mm-hmm.
delivery of software and things like that, right? Like, if you're completely operating at your max, what you don't have you don't have is slack in the system, right?
Right.
And if you
Yeah.
don't have that, then your team doesn't get an opportunity to step back, think, explore. You need to get bored. You need to be able to,
Mm-hmm.
have that downtime for you to, you know, get that dose of creativity, right? In fact,
Mm-hmm.
we've had to try really hard to build that in our team. We need to, like, as painful as it is sometimes to move around customer commitments or things like that. We've had consistently a week or two of hackathon time where
Mm.
we say you got nothing else to do, just go explore ideas, succeed at some, fail at many more, but we need to do that. We need to step back
Yeah.
and we need to be able to invest in those things. I mean, and it's not just work, it's kids. You know,
Yeah. Yeah.
you
Absolutely.
they're completely busy with screen time, and it isn't till you tell them nope, no screen time, and be like, Mama, I'm bored. It's like, great, that's awesome. And that's
So
when you
now what?
see,
What do you do?
yeah,
Yeah.
you see the most creative games come out during that time.
Yes.
It's amazing what they're able to do when they're just told to um, you know be bored. Or
Yeah.
and as parents it's hard, like sometimes you're like, oh, you're bored, let's figure out something to do. And my default, if they come to me, is really like, that's awesome that you're
Mm-hmm.
bored. Now you'll figure it out.
Yeah, it's interesting because if you think back to the way that we thought about the world before we had to work, right?
Yeah.
You think about what, the amazing possibilities that you had out in front of you. I remember when I was a kid, going out and playing, there was all of these things that I wanted to learn, and it wasn't because I could get rich from learning them. It
Right.
was for completely different reasons. I wanted to learn, how to jump my bike over a ramp or something, right? And it was because it would be cool. And all
Yeah.
my friends, we could do it together with our friends. And, where do we get that now?
It's
And so
extremely
much of it is
hard.
driven off of that professional mindset of, oh, I need to do this so that I can make money, right?
Yeah.
Or whatever and it's completely valid. Just to be clear, I don't want to act like money doesn't matter, right? That would be a horrible thing.
Yeah.
And there's certainly people who are listening to the show who are probably sitting there thinking, well, it's nice that you get a chance to go and be bored at work. My boss doesn't allow that, and I don't have a way out, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But this, as a imperative to the leaders who do have a chance to make this impact, it's so important to recognize that the people who are working on your team, people first, just like you said, Ravs, the people who are working on your team are not machines. You can't
Yeah.
extract work from them. If they have, this is what's so amazing to me. I can have an extra 20 minutes to go on a walk outside that totally changes my productivity for the day.
Yeah.
20 minutes of a walk outside. And you wouldn't ever think, oh, I'm going to invest 20 minutes in order to have a more productive day. But because we are integrated, animals, right? Like we're not machines. We're this organic thing that exists in the world. All of these other activities we participate in are in kind of concert with our work. And that's so often missed.
Yeah, it's you're so right. In fact, we were talking about, just how much stepping outdoors and taking a walk was so much better. And we sort of share these things with each other. And what we started as just a habit experiment was doing walking one-on-ones. So
Yeah.
take a break from the screen and let's just go out. You go out for a walk, I go out for a walk, and we're just going to talk on the phone. And that was actually really fun. It was really refreshing. And yeah,
Yeah.
many times you can't do it because you want to share screen or something. But if you don't, that actually worked really well. And,
Mm-hmm.
people had dog walking one-on-ones or just I'm outdoors one-on-ones. And it was just, I think it helps a lot. It really does.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And you brought up a really interesting point about this whole making money. And I had a recent encounter with my son. Actually, my son was younger at that time, so not very recent. He was uh, 5 or 6 or something. And we were talking about what do you want to be when you grow up? And he's like, I want to be an ice cream scooper at Ben and Jerry's.
Mm-hmm.
And, as a parent, my first thought was, wow,
Oh
you know,
no.
oh no. But I asked him, oh, that's interesting. Why? Why do you want to be an ice cream scooper at Ben and Jerry's? And he goes, because uh, every time the ice cream scooper does their job, there people leave with a smile.
That's so cool.
And I was so touched. I was like, because he's like, have you ever seen anybody when the scooper hands them ice cream, they don't smile and say thank you? Like it really brings them joy in their day. And I was speechless. I didn't know what to
Yeah.
say. I was like, that's amazing. And that was just such a great quality to see in my son. I was like, that's really great. And I left it at that. But it made me wonder where in our journey of growing up do we like grow up and care less about these people and like giving joy to people and move more into like, you know, I need to figure out how
401k
to,
management or something,
yes,
right?
right. So it's just I learned so much from my kids. It's amazing. You see the world through them and then you reflect on just their perspective, and it keeps reminding you of the little things that it's just so black and white for them, right? You're like, yep,
Yeah.
people, and that's what you need to care about. And I don't
Mm-hmm.
know where in the world and time I learned to care about other things more than just caring about people and bringing joy to them, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Today's episode is sponsored by Linode. Whether you're working on a personal project or managing enterprise infrastructure, you deserve simple, affordable, and accessible cloud computing solutions that allow you to take your project to the next level. The amazing thing about Linode is that it works at all of those points along the chain. In other words, you can start out with Linode at a very small scale on personal projects, and it will scale with you. You can simplify your cloud infrastructure with Linode's Linux virtual machines and develop, deploy, and scale your modern applications faster and easier. You can get started on Linode today with $100 in free credit. That goes a long way on Linode for listeners of Developer Tea, and you can find all the details at linode.com/developertea. That's linode.com/developertea. Linode has 11 global data centers, provides 24/7, 365 human support with no tiers or handoffs, regardless of your plan size. And in addition to shared and dedicated compute instances, you can use that $100 of credit on S3 compatible object storage, managed Kubernetes, and more. You can host your website, build your app, store or back up your media. It's really up to you, and it's all free with $100 in Linode credit. Head over to linode.com/developertea and click on the Create Free Account button to get started. And be sure to check out Linode's new YouTube channel for video tutorials, security tips, and more. That's youtube.com/Linode. Thanks again to Linode for sponsoring today's episode of Developer Tea.
I want to rewind a little bit because you're talking about your past now and some of the experiences you had. I'm curious, can you rewind us to a moment in your career or even a story about your life where you felt like it was a particularly low point, or maybe it was a turning point, a point where you had an epiphany that changed your course? for the better. Can you tell us a story about that?
Are you specifically talking like a career story, or I meant a
No,
change in your career, or
in the spirit of this of what we've been saying, I definitely don't want to split those up. I absolutely anything that you want to bring.
Yeah, that's a good question. I've had many moments of inspiration or epiphanies, you might call it. So a few years ago, like, I was just reflecting upon my childhood, and so just for brief context, I was born and brought up in Kuwait, and I was there during the 1990 Gulf War, or when Iraq invaded Kuwait, and I was in fourth grade. So I have, enough memories that, I mean, I remember and I distinctly feel the fear and uncertainty and, just the feelings that I went through. And but I was, again, young enough to not really internalize what was happening around me in the world at that time, right? And so a couple of years ago, I was just sitting and reflecting upon that time, and uh, I I was thinking about how my dad got us out of Kuwait, and we were refugees and going into India. And I remember at that time, like, I had an older brother who, um, much wiser than me, when we were all as a family planning to leave Kuwait and go to India. Parents were worried about, food and water, and are we going to have enough to eat, or, be safe, and let's, you know, sew some cash bills and folds of skirts in case we need it, or carry some cans of food, and things like that. And I was like worried about my Barbie dolls and teacups that I was leaving behind, right? And I was like, I want to take these. And my brother, very rightly so, he's like, really, you want to take these? um and my dad was the one who just, put his foot down, and he said, yeah, I mean, this is what's important to her, and so we're going to take these. And he's like, we'll make a bag for you, just put whatever you want in. And of course, I was happy, and all was well in the world at that time for me. But as an adult, I was just thinking back on that experience, and it made me realize that's what true empathy is, and how empathy is a life skill, not just, in family and community, but in leading teams, in building teams, in people first, right? I think about um, how, as an adult, you could sort of live what that 9-year-old was, going through, and acted upon what's important to her. And I think, again, at this time and age, it's so particularly pertinent because we're all going through a pandemic, and most of us have never been through anything like this before. And I think about my kids, I think about my friends, I think about my family, I think about my team members, I think about work. And 30 years later, if people are going to recount their experiences, what did they go through? And how what they go through today will shape their memories and shape how they feel about this time period is all based on how we act today.
Wow.
And so that is just a constant reminder for me and keeps me and my actions in check, really. And all those days when I lose it and I'm like, oh my God, like, why aren't things, a little more organized? You just gotta step back and think about the energy that you're giving out, positive or negative, and what are my kids going to remember, and how are my teammates going to remember this? And so I just think that for me, more than one event in my life, it's just a series of these everyday conversations I have with people, like friends, family, kids, that really shaped me for who I am, if that makes sense at all.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
I recently had a similar moment with our son. His name is Liam, and I woke up for some reason. I believe it was yesterday or the day before. I woke up for some reason thinking about an experience that I had when I was young, when I was probably around his age, which stuck in my mind. You know, there's not a lot that we carry from, you know, when we're 3 or 4 years old, but this particular experience stuck in my mind of going on a nature walk with my mom. And if you're not familiar with what a nature walk is, basically you walk around and you pick up, you know, leaves and sticks and rocks and whatever else. And, you know, during the pandemic, we've spent so much of our time inside. We've spent so much of their days, like you said, with screen time. And they're just, you know, kind of stuck in this kind of continuous pattern. And in my mind, I thought it wouldn't be hard. It wouldn't be difficult for us to make that special moment a memory for my son, the way that my mom did for me. And we went out, and he, of course, he loved it, right? Like,
sounds fun.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you know, go and pick up rocks, of course, you know.
Yeah.
But I can't, you know, get away from this feeling that, you know, if we can take ourselves up and out of the tide, right? If we can get our minds above that rip current that's dragging us through 2020 right now, right? That's just kind of saying we've got to, you know, put our heads down and try to get through this year as fast as we possibly can so we can get on the other side of this. And instead remember that, hey, we've got moments here. We've got these experiences that are right in front of our faces. And all we have to do is stop and take advantage of them and live in the moment that we have. And that is such a rewarding thing. Instead of saying we're going to write the whole year off, you know, this, if I'm thinking like a child, a year is a long time. I mean, I remember, you know, from one birthday to the next felt like an eternity.
I know.
And,
now they come too soon.
You know, instead of wishing, you know, every day that this year would pass, that all of this difficulty would pass, now I'm saying, okay, you know, and not that I'm a saint and like every day I'm perfectly, you know, experiencing the moment, but rather I'm taking a moment more often. I'm trying to at least take a moment and say, no, this year isn't terrible. I don't want to rush through it. I want to experience every moment that I can.
You articulated it way better than I could. And I was trying to say about the same thing, which is exactly these small moments, these little moments are what are going to make memories. And just like you, that may happen once a week for me, but even if it happens once a week, I'm really glad about it. And you, again, I just have to remind myself, you know, taking my kids as an example, when I was their age, and you know, Kuwait was invaded by Iraq, our schools were obviously closed, and as a kid at that time, I was like, oh, cool, no school. And here I am expecting my kids to be bummed about no school. I want them to be excited about school, and I want them to, you know, love school for everything it is. And, you know, at some point I'm like, no, remember as a kid, you were so excited. Like, man, there was another country invading ours, and all I could think about was no school. Like, you know. Yeah. So again, it's about remembering, or trying to remember as much as you can, or putting yourselves in the shoes of other people, and you know, whatever they're going through and where they're at in their life stage, and it sort of makes sense.
You know, it's interesting you bring this up, and I think it's really, especially in companies that have a broad range of people. I've worked in companies where there was a bunch of people who were much younger than me that were in leadership positions, and it's really interesting. You mentioned this briefly there, the idea that you're remembering something in order to have empathy. There's also times where empathy is extremely difficult because you've never had that experience.
Yes.
And I think there's another core skill set that is often missed, especially when we're talking about leadership, of trusting and believing someone else's experience rather than saying, well, I can't imagine it, so therefore it's invalid.
Well
Right?
said.
And very, very rarely do we actually articulate it that way, but that is so often kind of the unconscious reasoning that we have, that I can't imagine that, and I'm going to discard it because I can't identify with it, so it's not valid.
Well said. I couldn't add anything more to it. You're absolutely right.
That's a hard one.
It's a hard one. It's a really hard one. Like your instinct is like, I can't imagine, or I can't understand, or I can't yeah, because you don't have your own experiences to dig into to try and put that in perspective. So you got to trust. In fact,
Yeah.
The company I work for, Up Level, we talk about engineering effectiveness, right? And everyone knows there's no magic bullet to it. Like our entire hour that we've talked about is we're talking about people, and we're, leading effective teams is about, leading people. And so obviously there's no one answer or metric you can look at to say whether you're effective or not. But again, the things that we try to do are all about what are the conditions in which developers are working, right? Like, do they feel like they're always on all the time? Do they even get time to work? It's like, it's a completely different viewpoint. So we'll see whether, it's great, or it's just we realize we can't really measure that either. But to your point, the trust, the relationships, it all matters in in that experience of working together. And you could have the most effective machines, but if there's no trust in the team, then, well, it's not going to last very long, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think to that point, I think you're onto something. The idea that you're cultivating conditions that would look like effective places, right? The way I use this analogy all the time. Maybe it's a metaphor. I don't know. It's one or the other.
I wouldn't know.
I think it's probably a metaphor. Anyway, the idea that our teams are less like machines, like we've already mentioned, and more like gardens. With a garden, you can stare at a plant all day long and wish it to grow. You can yell at it. You can sit by it and hold its hand, but ultimately you can't directly affect that plant, right? Like there's not much you can do. But what you can do is cultivate the soil around it.
Yeah.
You can work with the soil, and sometimes unexpected things are going to happen, right? You're going to have weeds, you're going to have pests, you're going to have all of these things that you're going to have to deal with in order to keep that plant healthy and growing and alive. But at the end of the day, there's not much that you can do directly to the plant. Now, moving it around to the right place is important. And of course, your main job is to make sure that that plant gets the water it needs, make sure that the soil is the right pH balance and all these things that go into being a good gardener. But it's this beautifully organic thing that you don't have direct control over. And even sometimes, no matter how hard you try, that plant just simply can't grow there. Right. And the metaphor works so well for teams, right? Because sometimes people just don't fit on a team either, as much as you hope for that position to work out. And it's not because they're a bad person. It's just that plant doesn't grow in that kind of soil.
I love that so much. I think it's such a perfect metaphor, analogy, whatever. And I'm going to steal that. Fair warning.
Well, I'm sure I didn't come up with it either. I don't know where I got it.
It's so beautiful. It fits completely perfectly. In fact, I've had personal experiences where I've moved the plant from one location in the garden to another, and it's thrived, right? I meant team members. Like, I don't have a green thumb at all, so I can kill mint. It's just, I don't deal well with real green things. But the analogy or the metaphor is just so perfect. You've got it spot on.
Ravs, thank you so much for spending time with me tonight. I know we're kind of over our time limit, and I appreciate you taking the time and the extra time with us here on Developer Tea. I have one final question. I promise it's a very short one. If you had 30 seconds to provide advice for developers of all backgrounds, what would you tell them?
Trust yourself, be true to yourself, have empathy, and make sure the environment's working for you as much as it's the manager's job to think of the same.
Wonderful. Good advice, packed with plenty of things that we can unpack maybe in a second interview one day in the future. But this has been wonderful. Thank you.
It was a pleasure talking to you. I had so much fun. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much first to you, the listener, for listening to this episode of Developer Tea, and of course to Ravs for joining me in this interview, in this episode, and the last episode of the show. Thank you again to today's sponsor, Linode. Head over to linode.com/developertea to get $100 worth of credit. Make sure you create a free account in there's a button there on the page, create free account. That will give you the $100 worth of credit. Thanks so much for listening to this episode. This episode and the show notes for this episode can be found at spec.fm, along with all the other episodes of the show, as well as other shows that you might find interesting and valuable to your career as an engineer. Today's episode was produced by Sarah Jackson. My name is Jonathan Cottrell, and until next time, enjoy your tea.